Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, January 28th, 2025. Time to do this all over again. Back into the whirlwind. So many things happening. That is, of course, by design. Donald Trump just throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, and sometimes knocking down the walls, sometimes throwing things at walls, not even interested in whether they stick or not. Just throwing things for the hell of it. And maybe there are no walls, and maybe I'm not throwing anything, and it's all an illusion. Well, chaos. Chaos reigns. Greg really nailed it when he said way back when, like a million years ago, that Trump is primarily and maybe only a chaos agent. That's all he is. That's just what he enjoys, and that's what we're going to get. It's crazy out there. What can I tell you? I'll start off, I guess, by saying that I am now watching everybody react to Sahil Kapoor's online, social media posting of a piece for NBC News, the headline of which is, Sahil's pitch on the post is Democrats' Playbook for Trump 2.0, tune out the noise, and focus on economic issues, kitchen table, that sort of thing. The headline in the piece itself is the same. In fact, he just repeats it. Now, knowing that the social media platforms will reproduce the photo and headline, I don't know how much that's worth, although sometimes it cuts off the headline. Anyway, that's all there is to the headline, and it's got people riled up because, of course, things are getting weirder and worser, and Donald Trump is claiming more and more outrageous powers for the presidency. I think you know which ones we're talking about. And people are upset. This is the Democratic response. This is it. I want to point that out first, mostly because, I too was like, well, what the hell do they mean by this? I mean, Democrats' Playbook, focus on economic issues. Well, all right. The top issue of the day, I guess, would have to be the renewed, again, 100 times, renewed claim from Trump to basically have personal ability to approve or disapprove of any spending by the federal government. I can pause any spending I want to. I have the power of the purse. I can impound funds permanently. I can, but for now, I'm only doing it temporarily, so you should let me get away with it in the courts, kind of thing. And like most people, I probably said to myself, well, I don't know, pausing all federal spending, that feels economic. That's like an economic issue. So hopefully that's not among the pieces of noise that are being tuned out. And I said that joining with a lot of people and thinking, come on, isn't there a more robust response we could be looking for from Democrats? That's sort of the subtext of the stories of the day on liberal-leaning social media. Why aren't they doing anything? And of course, we are also reminded there isn't a great deal that they can do, like according to the norms, the legal norms that say, well, you can vote against these things in Congress, but you'll lose. You can protest, you can point things out. But then people kind of concede that would be enough for me. But really point them out like in ways that actually make the point strongly, as opposed to saying, well, this is a key economic issue. And even when we get back to the price of eggs, it's not really, I understand why you want to hammer on that, but you're not really hammering. You're just saying, well, what does that have to do with the price of eggs? And I know that's an old saying, but why not scream or something? I don't know. Anyway, I wanted to point this article out to you, not only because everybody's talking about it, but because immediately after, lightly grousing about this, I got a note here from someone you too may follow on social media, a popular fellow, Norbusiness, who says, I'm beginning to see this article, this Sahil Kapoor article with the headline, Democrats' Playbook, tune out the noise, focus on economic issues, as a little bit of, as he puts it, rat effing by NBC on account of the timing, really, vis-a-vis, he says, vis-a-vis the timing, since most of the quotes and such that he's basing these headlines, etc., on took place last week, which, might might help explain some of it. Why there's no direct reaction to the impoundment threat, for instance. On the other hand, last week we already knew about the impoundment threat. Why did we know about the impoundment threat? Well, 3 good reasons. 4, I guess, that I can think of why we already knew about the impoundment threat, and we shouldn't have to worry that the quotes came from last week. 1 was last week he was saying I can impound funds and that I'm going to. So that probably should have tipped us off. 2, of course, Project 2025, which I know he told the press, I don't know anything about it, I never heard of it, it has nothing to do with my agenda. That too also said, yeah, when we get in, we're going to start impounding funds. 3, in the last Trump administration, Trump said, I can impound funds. It's called I can do it. Whatever his quote was. But he actually did, in fact, make that threat explicitly somewhere between 2017 and 2021 when he was president the first time. And 4thly, he was actually impeached for this in his first term. I know that usually if you walk around, man on the street interviews or something and you ask people, what was Trump's impeachment for? Well, first of all, they go, if they know that he was impeached at all, which is amazing, but people don't. And sometimes that's people think, well, he wasn't removed from office and so therefore he wasn't impeached. No, I know. But what was the subject matter? And they would say January 6th. And that's true for the second impeachment. The first impeachment, people will say Ukraine. Ukraine, yes. Ukraine what? Ukraine, Biden, something. They said Ukraine bribed Biden to help his son or something. Or Biden bribed somebody. Something. And if they can remember any of it at all. The plain fact of the matter is that the impeachment was over his impoundment power claims. Remember that he impounded funds that Congress had appropriated to go to Ukraine for its defense against Russia's invasion, and he was pro-Russian and said, don't send the money. And what he did then, I guess, in addition to impounding the money, was then he turned to the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, and said, I'll unimpound at least some of this money for you if you do me a favor, and that's find me dirt on Joe Biden. So it was a twofer play. One was, of course, trying to dig up dirt on his political opponents and target them, using the power of the government to do it. But 2, that power of the government was, the leverage was in impounding the funds that were supposed to go to Ukraine. He has been doing this for many, many years. He was impeached for it by the actual Congress of the United States and everything, in front of everybody. It was in all the newspapers, all the same newspapers that are running headlines now this morning that are suddenly stunned that, he's claiming that he's got the right to impound funds. Yeah, like last time, like he wrote in his plan, like he was impeached for. And still, I have to wake up to headlines, 5 things you need to know about Trump's temporary pause on funding. And that, too, becomes an issue. The temporary pause thing, 1, it's a line that the press is supposed to buy. Well, it's only temporary. I mean, and you should understand that what he means by temporary is it's temporary until somebody makes me spend the money. How long will this temporary pause last? Until somebody punches me in the face and makes me unpause it. And if that's forever, in effect, well, that's your fault, really. I just said it was temporary. And also, it's supposed to warn off journalists. Well, don't write that it's impoundment. It's a temporary pause. Don't put in a paper that Trump got mad that you called it impoundment, which is what it is. So, I don't know. And it seems to be working because the press is saying, well, and by the way, there's an argument being made. They say there's an argument to be made. It is, in fact, being made. And it's being made by, the same circle of people who say, and there's absolute immunity for people who are president or might become president in the future. There isn't, but we can convince, the requisite number of black-robed figures to say that there is. That makes it sound a little more mystical and stupid, doesn't it, than actually, getting a ruling from the Supreme Court of the United States. That sounds so very sensible. But, well, we took it to secret chamber, and we got 5 black-robed figures to say, well, okay, they're not hooded figures. We know who their faces are, but it does make it sound a little bit. Well, people love Lord of the Rings, and the weirdo hobbits who are trying to take over the earth via cryptocurrency and Greenland somehow might really enjoy hearing about it that way. But yeah, I mean, no, there's no impoundment power. This has been fought out already, and some of you at least are aware of, remember, have done some reading about, and in some cases actually been informed by a newspaper once in a while, that this was a fight that we had last time there was a wildly corrupt president and people thought they could seize back power at some point. Richard Nixon, his idea was that he could impound federal spending that he disapproved of. This proved not to be the case. If you grew up during the Reagan, then George H.W. Bush, then Bill Clinton era, and you are therefore one of the Gen Xers who, for some strange reason, was the only age cohort to go for Trump in all of this, you may remember this not as impoundment, but as a fight that eventually developed into the idea of the line item veto, which was also held to be unconstitutional. But that may ring a bell for you if you ever, read a newspaper during your upbringing at any point. Because why were Republican presidents like Ronald Reagan and even Democratic presidents like Bill Clinton so interested in having a line item veto? Because that was invented once the Supreme Court said, no, impoundment won't work. The president of the United States doesn't have that kind of power over federal spending. That power is reserved for the Congress. All right, time for a moment's pause for morning beverage. All right, it's the Golden Voice tea at the moment, which I got to tell you, there's a coffee over there waiting for me. It's going to ruin all the effects of the Golden Voice tea, but I can't fit I don't have the time to fit 2 hot drinks in prior to going to air. Anyway, the line item veto was concocted as an idea to substitute for just straight up impoundment. And it was just a somewhat more complex version that required a little bit more handwriting, I guess, than impoundment. The impoundment power was essentially boiled down to what Trump's doing now. The president says, I'm an important guy and this is federal money, and so therefore, and that's all it is. I'm important. I'm the president. It's federal dollars. I say don't spend it. There's no indication anywhere in the Constitution that that's an existing power. And in fact, there's pretty clear indication that it's not an existing power and that the power to do that belongs to Congress. That's why impoundment was held to be illegal. And just to kind of nail that down, Congress also passed all sorts of legislation to make it explicitly illegal and codify the budget process in the Budget Act of 1974, which was about the time that people were realizing, hey, this Nixon character is a real jerk. We got to not only get rid of him, but we got to write new rules about how some other idiot later won't be able to do this. So there's an anti-impoundment act, there's a budget act, there's acts all over the place for why you can't do this. And yet here it is happening again. But they came up with the idea of, well, what about if the president doesn't just declare things impounded? Instead, he uses his veto power, which is in the Constitution, except this time it'll be the power to veto specific portions of legislation, or even if we limit it just to appropriations, particular items of appropriations. The whole bill isn't blocked. That was clearly too much for everybody in the impoundment context. But what about if he said these certain types of spending offend me for whatever reason, and you can strike those out and everything else goes forward? And people, I don't know, some people actually thought that was a reasonable compromise. Others did not. And guess who won? It's the did not people. They sent that to the Supreme Court, too. The Supreme Court said, yeah, no, even line item veto is beyond the pale, beyond the powers of the presidency. And they kept pushing on, by the way. They invented yet more crap to try to give the president some sort of ability to block out certain kinds of spending. And the successor piece of legislation, the successor idea, first to impoundment became line item veto. Line item veto became something very short-lived, and you probably didn't even pick up on it if you were adult during the Clinton administration. You probably forgotten about enhanced rescissions authority. That was another workaround that they came up with in order to give the president. This time, he was allowed to make recommendations that the Congress reconsider particular items and rescind the funding. But it was essentially it was a cobbled together weak form of impoundment whereby the president would say, I question the necessity of this funding, and I will temporarily put it on hold and ask the Congress to reconsider whether it would rescind its appropriation in deference to my recommendation. And because it required a congressional act to implement, it was thought that this might pass constitutional muster. But guess what? In the end, it really didn't. And it was also so cumbersome and stupid that they decided never to really use it. I don't remember whether it was explicitly unconstitutional, but it was right up to the line. And also, it was just largely considered an ineffective method. There have been other things that they've come up with along the way. The Republicans had a version of it too, which, I don't know, at some point, Newt Gingrich came up with the idea of corrections days, and there was other enhanced authorities. And what's the one that they still stick around, and now for some reason the name escapes me. But this was actually for an enhanced review of enhanced review of federal executive activity by Congress, and they can undo rulemaking and federal regulations this way by rejecting them. But similarly motivated, I think, but from the other direction. At any rate, I guess suffice to say that this has a 50-plus year history, impoundment, and it was toyed with before Nixon, but I mean the legal issues were settled almost 50 years ago, if not a full 50. I don't know. You'll have to check the date on me. But anyway, to now wake up and say he's claiming he has this authority when he's claimed he's had this authority all along. Trump did. There's a long history of there not being such an authority, but he's claiming it anyway. And he was even impeached for attempting to exercise this authority. So there's also this other thread of discussion in which now the Trump team is claiming, well, since it's only temporary, it will be okay. And one, again, I don't believe that he actually means that it's temporary. And two, I think they're misusing the term as it is. As a matter of fact, here is a blue sky thread on the subject that I think came to my attention via Brendan Nyhan, if I have that correct. At any rate, this a thread from Sam Bagenstos, whose name I may or may not be pronouncing properly. I don't know Sam, but Sam knows me, I guess. He's following me, so I guess I ought to be following him back. He is the Frank J. Millard Professor of Law at the University of Michigan Law School. How do you like that? And wait, I'm not done with his titles. This is the first of his name. Arlene Susan Cohn, Professor of Social Policy at the University of Michigan Ford School of Public Policy. Wow. And importantly here, former general counsel at HHS, Health and Human Services, and OMB. OMB is where this impoundment directive is allegedly coming from. General counsel for the OMB, he'll have some real idea of what's going on here. He says, I see some suggestions in the reporting regarding the OMB impoundment order that a mere delay in spending appropriated funds is legal, but that's not really true. And I don't know whether the aim is to make people write that it's actually legal. I think so. And some people are going in for it and writing it, but mostly it's just served up as a distraction. So why isn't it really true? The delay that OMB has ordered specifically contradicts the Impoundment Control Act. Well, that would be problematic, but it's only temporary. Yes, but you only temporarily murdered him. He'll be resurrected in the great second coming, I have read in your book, but for now he's dead and you're going to have to be put on trial for murder, sir. All right. The ICA, he says, does not just cover a total refusal to spend. It covers withholding or delaying the obligation or expenditure of budget authority, whether by establishing reserves or otherwise, provided for projects and activities, and any other type of executive action or inaction which effectively precludes the obligation or expenditure of budgetary authority, including authority to obligate by contract in advance of appropriations as specifically authorized by law. Yes, dry as California was until yesterday. That's another story. But what it comes down to is, no, this temporary nonsense doesn't make any bit of difference in this. First of all, we don't believe you that it's temporary. And second of all, it wouldn't be legal even if it was. I don't know why people say it is. They're just saying it. I don't know why people are believing it and printing it, I guess. But probably most reporters are leaning on, they did say it, and I am accurately quoting them. Now, at some point, you might enter into the story, but they're lying, or they have it wrong. They're just saying it. It would be to your benefit at some point to say, this is the kind of thing that Trump administration officers and officials, and, probably some other administrations too, if you feel like, trying to play both sides on it. But this is the sort of thing that they say so that I'll print it because they said it, but it is false and they know it, and they're hoping that I'll print it and just lean on the fact that I said it, not to credit it in any way, but just to show that I said it. And then people will read it and say, oh, okay, that guy says it doesn't matter because it's only temporary. It doesn't matter. And Sam Bagenstos, who knows or has reason to know exactly how this law has always been interpreted to work, says, yeah, it doesn't go like that. There are many, many very profound but dry reasons why, and it comes down to they knew what they were doing when they wrote the Impoundment Control Act. They had just seen a president unconstitutionally attempt to impound funds, and they wanted to prevent it. And they knew very well that Dick Nixon was kind of a sneaky jerk, and he would come up with some semantic games that would allow him, in his view, to circumvent the law. If it simply said you're not allowed to impound funds, he'd say, well, I'm only temporarily pausing funds. And that was very obvious, and they closed that off intentionally in the terms of the act. What Trump people are doing is just ignoring that entirely and saying, well, it's different, and it isn't. The Impoundment Control Act either calls either of these actions, that is, impoundment straight up, or delay, or temporary reshuffling, or simply saying I'm reviewing things, or I'm putting it in a fund for later, holding it in escrow, or what some of these other things that they said were you can't block. It says the Impoundment Control Act says I can't block appropriations, but it doesn't say I can't block future contracting authority based on the idea that the money is going to come through later. You can't block that. Well, or the claim was that the president maybe could, but they said no. We wrote it specifically in there. You're just not allowed to mess with the money once Congress has appropriated it and the bill has become law. Either you've signed it or vetoed it, or refused to sign, but it becomes effective as law 10 days later anyway. The purse strings belong to Congress. That's the bottom line, and that's what you've learned about it, most likely. Now, the ICA calls either of these actions or inactions, right, a deferral of budget authority. And the statute specifically says that deferrals shall be permissible only in 3 circumstances. And guess what? It sounds like this is not one of those circumstances. To provide for contingencies, They always worry about something coming up that was unforeseen, an emergency. For efficiency, so DOJ might want to get involved, I guess, or as specifically provided by law. To underscore the point, the ICA says no officer or employee of the United States, and remember, GSA doesn't think the president is an officer or employee of the United States, but I digress. Armando can tell you all about that one. That in their spectacularly backwards ass ruling in order that preserved Trump's ability to hold on to ownership of the Trump Hotel bribe machine last time. The lease said by its terms, this place can't be leased to any officer or employee of the United States because the opportunity for corruption is too great and too obvious. And, well, he was president of the United States. He owned the hotel. They asked the GSA for a ruling, and the GSA said, hey, he's not an employee or an officer. He's the president. Doesn't say the president can't do it, but he's an officer. Nope. Anyway, the ICA says no officer or employee of the United States may defer any budget authority for any other purpose. Note what's not included among the permissible purposes for delaying spending spending money that Congress appropriated. Sorry. Okay. Hang on. The music needs to interrupt me in a second. I don't want to miss my cue. What is not included among the permissible purposes for delaying spending money that Congress appropriated? Making sure that the spending is consistent with the president's policies. They actually, in making up this excuse about temporary this, that, and the other thing, they actually doubled back on this and said, well, we're reviewing it in order to make sure that it's in compliance with the president's policies, which is actually like, oh, actually you now made it worse. That is explicitly not permissible. Your policies don't matter. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, let's see. Can I find my way back to the thread we were reading? Yes, Sam Bagenstos, who has, among other things, served as general counsel to the OMB in the past and is a law professor at the University of Michigan, has plenty to say about why the claim from the Trump administration that the pause in spending that they claim to be ordering is only temporary is of no import here. But also, I mean, that's a technical issue. This is a facial violation of the Impoundment Control Act and an impeachable offense. And if you don't believe me, I refer you to the immediately, well, not the immediately prior, but the penultimate, I guess, impeachment of one Donald J. Trump. I don't know if these two guys know one another, if they're related. The Donald J. Trump who's president now and the Donald J. Trump who was president from 2017 to 2021. But the other guy from 17 to 21 guy was impeached for this. And golly, everyone seems to have forgotten that, or at least on Blue Sky. We'll see whether in real life everyone has forgotten. Okay, but I'm sure Sam knows. That's not what he's talking about. He's focusing on this micro issue, which is whether or not claiming that the impoundment is a temporary pause makes any difference. And he's basically making the point, no, the authors of the Impoundment Control Act were very clear that that could happen too, and they didn't want it to, and they were making it illegal. So, bad. Anyway, what's not included among the permissible purposes for delaying spending money that Congress has appropriated is this idea, which they threw in by way of excuse, I guess, making sure the president is consistent with the spending is consistent with the president's policies. That was one of the. Not only is it only temporary, we're just trying to make sure it's consistent with presidential policy. But again, the Impoundment Control Act is about saying there's no presidential role in appropriations. You sign the bill, you veto the bill. That's your role. The whole thing, all or nothing. And then that's the end of your involvement in the process. A spending law passed by Congress and signed by the president sets the policy per Article 1 of the Constitution, right? So what's the president's policy on spending? The policy is he signed this bill. That's the policy now. But I didn't get to make it, and I'm the president. Yeah, there's some things that are beyond your power. What? No, there isn't. I have all the powers. A new president can't unilaterally, or even an old president, can't unilaterally override that policy, even temporarily. And that's the point of this provision of the ICA, to enforce Congress's power of the purse. You've probably heard of the power of the purse. Yet, the OMB memo, the new one, makes clear that the whole point of the pause is to make sure that spending appropriated by Congress is consistent with the president's priorities. That's an impermissible reason to delay spending. It is also a gigantic violation of the separation of powers. Yeah, I know the president wants spending to be consistent with the president's priorities, but the president is not a member of Congress. In fact, spending is consistent with Congress's priorities. The president has the right to get mad about it, and that is it. Note the key language, and I guess this from the memo. Career and political appointees in the executive branch have a duty to align federal spending and action with the will of the American people as expressed through presidential priorities. No, the opposite is true. Financial assistance should be dedicated to advancing administration priorities. That is something that the president can ask Congress to do. Congress does not have to comply. This is all about a new president trying on his own to override the policies adopted through the constitutional process by Congress and signed into law by a previous president. That flouts the congressional power of the purse and violates the ICA, even though it is temporary, which I don't even believe it's actually temporary. So I would add that. But even if you give them the benefit of the doubt and believe that it is temporary, it doesn't matter. It's still not permissible. All right. So what has been going on? What the hell's going on around here? There's plenty of other stories. And I mentioned some of them along the way, and I'm going to have to open some of these things. A lot of these things are blue sky. And so therefore, okay, here a link. I grabbed the link from Catherine Rampell, Washington Post columnist, op-ed columnist, a CNN commentator as well, who I'm sure you've seen all over, and you can seen her enough times on TV to know whether or not I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. Is it Rampell or Rampell? And some of you who watch CNN can tell me. She's linking to the Washington Post article about this and adding her commentary. White House pauses. Well, no, she's not. She's repeating the headline, which is amazing. White House pauses all federal grants, sparking confusion. In a sense, I guess, you could defend confusion. Everybody who knows what they're talking about says you're not allowed to do this. Orange guy says, yes, I am, although he really doesn't. And it was pointed out to me in conversation on Blue Sky. Trump was golfing when this happened. He doesn't really necessarily have any idea. He may at some point have given some input. And I want there to be no federal spending on poisonous sex lollipops. What? Okay, I mean, I'll write that down. And also, we got to do something about, I don't know. Right, garbage up. But then he went golfing, and it says anonymous drones and the authors of Project 2025 and the like who are writing this memo up. And sometime, I don't know whether they scribbled his name on it or what, or they brought it to Florida. Here, sir, in between golf rounds, sign this thing. By the way, I mean, I know this is the dumbest thing to pay any attention to, but I was reminded the other day that Trump said that he was going to be so busy that he wasn't even going to play golf while he was president. He made the same promise the first time. I probably won't be able to play any golf. And he played like a record number of days on vacation playing golf. And now he's off to shatter that record because he's only been president for a week and he's been golfing 2 or 3 times already, which whatever. But apparently he made a second promise not to do it, and then made another comment to the press heading into the weekend. They asked him point blank, "You going to be playing some golf this weekend?" Just trying to be friendly with him, which is stupid, but that's what they were doing. And he said, no, I'll probably be too busy. And then he played twice. And one of the things he played through is the issuance of this impoundment idea and this memo. So the confusion is between everybody who knows how things work and one guy who says, I want it to work a different way, and the people who remind him that's not how this works. But Catherine had some additional commentary on the piece, and we can read through the Washington Post piece, but might need to skip around a little bit. But she writes that there's some ambiguity, she says, about whether this pause means that, for instance, then she goes into specific programs. Is this paused? Is that paused? And the answer is none of it is paused because none of it is effective. He can't pause anything. But here's the confusion. He says he can pause it. Yeah, well, I mean, I don't care. He said that the Revolutionary War troops took over the airports. That didn't happen. As a matter of fact, he says that last night, while you and I were asleep, the military invaded California and turned the water spouts on, and now they have plenty of water. Apparently, it rained yesterday in California, and he's now going to claim credit for it having rained. But there is, of course, as always, is there a kernel of truth to what he's babbling about? If I say yes, then you'll think he has a point. But there is something you could point out. Apparently, there are federal government owned and operated pumps of some kind somewhere along the line in the California water system, which were undergoing routine maintenance and were restarted yesterday. And that became, in Trump's mind, that the military invaded and they found the giant spigot that I told you about, and they turned it on, and instead of the water pouring into the Pacific Ocean uselessly, it's now flowing beautifully to all the golf courses and, of course, our beautiful farmers in Southern California, which is, one interpretation of it. The other interpretation, of course, is that a unicorn farted water all over America, and but there's less attention paid to that theory for some strange reason. But anyway, no reality to it. But while he was golfing, this happens, and now we have serious commentators saying, I don't know, there's confusion. Well, okay, some of the ambiguity apparently is whether the pause, if there is one, means that, for instance, no Medicaid or CHIP payments can go out for the next 2 weeks. Are we pausing? Did they put a 2-week thing on it? I mean, on the one hand, I got to laugh. I said earlier, he means I'm just going to pause it until somebody makes me spend the money. No, he was very specific. He had a very specific time period in mind. Oh, really? What was it? And God help you, if you say 2 weeks, you're fired. It is 2 weeks. Are you kidding me? It's like the greatest tell he's got. Remember, this guy bankrupted the casinos, right? All federal spending, by the way, every dollar now has to go through the hands of the guy who bankrupted casinos. Fantastic. Just what a great government efficiency that is. But can he pause it for 2 weeks? He's lying when he says 2 weeks. Well, he's lying all the time. But if he says 2 weeks, it's just like, oh, come on. It's like a Wilhelm scream, or it's like punctuating with a clown horn. 2 weeks, very short period of time. Anyway, that was a terrible horn. Got to get myself a horn. All I've got is the the censoring horn. I guess that works. Anyway, Catherine, nonetheless, says there's some ambiguity about whether this pause means that no Medicaid or CHIP payments can go out. Hearing different interpretations from different budget experts, hoping for some clarity on this. I imagine that the budgeting experts who are budgeting experts are saying, no, it doesn't mean that that's paused. Nothing's paused. You can't pause things. Others are people who occupy offices ordinarily said to be, when they're quoted, the occupants of those offices are quoted in the newspaper. That's a budget expert. But in this case, this is a Trump person occupying that office. That's just a guy who wandered in off the street, and he's hiding behind a door that says budget expert. And he says, nah, we can do this. Now, she goes on to say, hoping for some clarity on this, and then later, broader agreement. Now, I guess she thinks she's found broader agreement that it applies to discretionary spending payments like Head Start and WIC and the like. So there you go. No food for the temporary period during which Trump tries to decide whether he wants there to be welfare payments for women, infants, and children to be able to afford food. No, the answer was given earlier by the professor. The Impoundment Control Act says no to this, and the Federal Budget Act says no to this, and the Congressional Power of the Purse says no to this. But you see, we're all laboring under some certain confusion. What does the Washington Post article say about this? I mean, just out of curiosity, White House pauses all federal grants, sparking confusion. Trillions of dollars could be on hold. We should find out, because that seems like an economic issue. According to an Office of Management and Budget memo. That's a very expensive memo. Trillions of dollars. Jeff Stein, Jacob Bogage, I don't know, Bogage, and Emily Davies have written this piece. We'll see whether it's to their credit or not. The White House Budget Office is ordering a pause. It's not even the president, it's the Budget Office, ordering a pause to all grants and loans dispersed by the federal government, according to an internal memo sent to agencies Monday, creating significant confusion across Washington. That's why Rampell says there's confusion, because the paper said there was confusion. Why is the paper saying there's confusion? Because these three authors are confused. Why are they confused? And it's because they're Trump people are saying this memo does everything under the sun. Now, right here at the beginning, it does say, pause to all grants and loans. Do you ordinarily consider Medicaid or SNAP benefits or WIC benefits to be grants or loans? And most people probably would say no. Although in some form, sometimes these things are federal grants to the states, federal block grants to the states, which then distribute them through these programs. At the ground level, they're not grants, they're entitlement benefit payments to individuals. But the fact that the benefit payments are paid for with federal block grants has the most ambitious of Trump's people insisting that that's being blocked too, or probably the most hand-wringing Democrats. They, too, probably worry because they know how things actually work. In a 2-page document, Matthew J. Vaeth, maybe, V-A-E-T-H, the acting director, that's right, acting director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, not even the actual OMB director, because he hasn't been confirmed yet, instructs federal agencies to, quote, temporarily pause all activities related to obligations or disbursement of all federal financial assistance. The memo, a copy of which was obtained by the Washington Post, also calls for each agency to perform a comprehensive analysis to ensure its grant and loan programs are consistent with President Donald Trump's executive orders, which aimed to ban federal diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and limit clean energy spending, among other measures. The memo, which goes into effect Tuesday, states its orders, that's today, should not be construed, quote, construed, to affect Social Security or Medicare recipients, and also says the federal financial assistance put on hold does, quote, not include assistance provided directly to individuals. Right. But then the next question is, well, if the assistance is paid to individuals funded by block grants, what do we do? But the document says programs affected are including, but not limited to, financial assistance for foreign aid, non-governmental organizations, DEI, woke gender ideology, hello, I'm going off the rails, and the Green New Deal, which of course isn't a thing yet. Even before taking effect, the broad directive from the White House sent shockwaves through Washington and across the country as organizations dependent on the federal government struggled to understand its impact. And of course, that again, a feature, not a bug. He wants people confused. Trump and his aides have long vowed to halt spending on some programs reviled by the right, such as DEI and foreign aid. But the order appears to go far beyond those priorities to affect programs that serve tens of millions of Americans. Yes, and also some other people you probably weren't thinking of. But I did see Tom Bellin, for instance, who you may also follow along with on social media. But Tom noting that this also may mean when OMB shuts down all federal grants, of course, Trump was out golfing. He doesn't know. He says that we stopped paying, this could be the case, stopped paying the guys holding ISIS prisoners in Syria. And they didn't show up for work today. I'm sure that the news that the federal funds have been impounded hasn't really reached Syria yet. I mean, clearly they can go on the internet and find it, but I don't know. I'm sure that they don't know that they're not being paid for today, if that indeed is the case. But if it's foreign aid money, right, that's being blocked, if that's what's paying for holding some of these prisoners, yeah, I guess that'll be paused. It'll take them some time to realize that they're not getting the money, but it's worth noting. Experts said the memo as written was poised to bring a rapid halt to scores of federal functions, even though it doesn't really have any power, from assistance to homeless shelters to financial aid for college students. Oh, that reminds me, something else about college students that made it into Pocket, but not into yesterday's show. Another proposal, another stupid proposal from the jackass in charge, that college scholarships. Have your kids gotten any college scholarships? You're very lucky, except now you're not lucky because college scholarships, according to this idiot president who's just trying to help working people, I love them. I love the uneducated, though, not the educated. Now, college scholarships will be deemed income to the student. You're going to have to pay taxes on the value of your college scholarship, which, of course, erases the college scholarship for most people. So just wanted to let you know, if you thought you were going to college, don't. Well, don't listen to him, but you're going to have to fight your way through tax court now in order to both attend college and pay for it. Anyway, Trump and his aides have long vowed to halt spending on things that they hate, like college and DEI. The memo, we don't know exactly how far it goes, but the zealots of the Trump administration say everything. Health grants distributed by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which they definitely hate, and state aid for disaster reconstruction. Do we have any things like that going on these days? All may face delays. It'll be interesting, too, when they cut off payments once again to people who need FEMA payments for disasters in North Carolina, now California, and Trump says, the Democrats didn't even pay for your disasters, that's why we got to get rid of FEMA. This was you. No, it was them. No. Developers expecting federal grants to expand the nation's energy supply could be disrupted. Remember when we were going to do that? $500 billion to build energy infrastructure for AI, which just got replaced yesterday by the Chinese or something. Questions quickly emerged about whether Medicaid, the health insurance program used by more than 70 million Americans, would see a pause in payments, which are distributed from the federal government to the states. Block grants. They don't bother telling you that. Tell them why. Block grants. 2 words. The feared disruption highlighted the extent of the new Trump administration's determination to target long-standing functions of the federal government. Though not confirmed by the Senate, Russell Vought, Trump's nominee to lead the budget office, has vowed to try to move power over spending from Congress to the executive branch, a battle many experts say could be foreshadowed by the budget office's pause on federal grants and loans. Yes, thank you, Mr. Expert. Foreshadowed. This is it. Yeah, I'm gonna try to move more power of spending from Congress to the executive branch. Okay, good luck. Let us know when that happens. Well, the guy who's the acting budget officer now says he's impounding that money. Why, that could foreshadow the budget office's pause. Okay, it does foreshadow it. Vogt and other Trump aides have said slashing... By the way, his first impeachment foreshadowed it. And they foreshadowed that happening even before they did it. Anyway, Vogt and other Trump aides have said slashing federal spending is necessary to contain the soaring national debt. You know, the old excuses. It's unclear precisely how much money could be affected by the order and why know anything about the budget, right? Budget experts put the number at a minimum of tens of billions of dollars, but the White House directive suggests the impact could be even greater. The memo states that of the $10 trillion that, quote, the federal government spent in fiscal year 2024, apparently, more than $3 trillion was federal financial assistance, such as grants and loans. Yeah. It was not immediately clear where those figures came from. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says the government spent $6.7 trillion in fiscal year 2024. If that struck you as weird. Isn't that interesting? So this is the Office of Management and Budget. Okay, you know something about the budget? Yeah. You know more than the law school professor over here from Michigan? Sure I do. All right. How much was the federal budget last year? $10 trillion. I'm sorry. You don't know anything about the budget. The federal government's budget last year was $6.7 trillion. It's a lot of money, but you're off by like 30% or more. I mean, you don't even have the numbers right. You're the Office of Management and Budget. Budget! Like crazy. What's going on here? I mean, honestly, how many times have we been over this area with Trump and paperwork, etc.? Like, they don't even bother to look up last year's budget. Like, you can't even look that up anywhere. That's so easy to find on Google or something like that. But why bother? But it's the sort of thing that ordinarily would make you say, is this a forgery? Is this a real memo? Should we be paying attention to it? Again, I have to come back to it. He forged electoral college votes. You don't think he could forge an OMB memo? I mean, there's no reason to forge an OMB memo, except one, this memo claims powers that everybody knows the president doesn't have, and claims the budget is a number everybody knows it isn't. So if not an outright forgery, and say it wasn't written by the administration, it was written by some guy who's trying to hoax, pull a hoax on us. I can't really figure out why that would happen. But if nothing else, you might ask, was this written by chatbot GPT? Like, they don't, maybe that'll be a sort of uplifting in the sense that we worried so much that a second Trump administration would be competent and know what levers to pull and really be able to make things happen in policy, but they just don't seem to have actually found those people. So instead, they're just having, chat bots write their memos for them, I guess. Is that valid? Well, by itself? A person familiar with the order, speaking on condition of anonymity to describe confidential decisions, confirmed the accuracy of the document and said it applies to all grants. Who's that guy? Do we have reason to believe him? The agencies are also required to submit detailed lists of projects suspended under the new order by February 10th. Federal agencies must assign responsibility and oversight to tracking the federal spending to a senior political appointee, not a career official, the memo states. So, even worse. But again, you might get this memo and say, well, it says I have a responsibility to report to the officials. But it says right here, the person who wrote this memo thinks that last year's budget was $10 trillion. And everybody who works in budget knows that it wasn't. Are you sure I have an order here that I have to comply with? I don't want to waste my time working on compliance with this supposed requirement only to find out, no, that was a hoax memo. Didn't you see where they said that the budget was $10 billion? Duh. Of course it's not real. Meanwhile, everybody's working on it. The funding delays are going to prove very difficult for grantees under the impression that the money is coming and have rent and salary payments dependent upon it, said Brian Riedel, maybe R-I-E-D-L, a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, a center-right think tank. They're supposed to cheer for this stuff. The memo was reported earlier Monday by journalist Marissa Kabas, who has been very upset at having broken the story and I believe She was complaining yesterday, probably quite rightly, the New York Times was reporting on the story as though they had discovered the memo. The Washington Post said the memo was made available to them, but they do at least point this out, even if it is down the bottom of the story. Democratic lawmakers condemn the order as likely to bring chaos and disruption for millions of Americans. They say this is only temporary, but no one should believe that. That's certainly true. Senate Minority Leader Charles E. Schumer said in a statement. But was any of the rest of the statement helpful? I don't know. Donald Trump must direct his administration to reverse course immediately. Okay, I don't think that's going to happen. The order's legality may be contested, but the president is generally allowed under law to defer spending for a period of time if certain conditions are met, according to budget experts. But then you heard, before we even read this thing, what those conditions are, and none of them exist here. To comply, though, Trump must make clear which budget accounts are frozen, and the budget office's order may not have given sufficient grounds under the law to pause funding. In fact, we read that not only did it not give sufficient grounds, it gave illegal and improper grounds that aren't even remotely the sort of thing we're looking for. The president wants it, is what they said. Pausing it over policy disagreements is not legal, said Bobby Kogan, a federal budget expert at the left-leaning Center for American Progress and a former Biden administration official. Low-income Americans could still be affected even if direct recipients of aid are meant to be exempt from that order, Kogan said, because federal funding for the early education program Head Start, for instance, goes to child care facilities, not individuals. And federal programs providing energy assistance to low-income Americans go through the states. Lie heap, an annual target, of course. Others warned of possible broad impacts. Joan Alker, executive director of the Center for Children and Families at the Georgetown McCourt School of Public Policy, said the budget office should, quote, immediately clarify if Medicaid recipients could be affected by the order, except they don't know any more than we do. And they're waiting to see whether President McMean says he really wants that to happen. Or whether he says, I don't want that to happen. Wink, wink. Make it happen. Donald Kettle, professor emeritus and former dean of the University of Maryland School of Public Policy, said the language in the memo is confusing, making its specific effects unclear. There will be widespread panic, Kettle said, and state and local governments, as well as the people most reliant on federal funding and grants, scramble to figure out if and when their cash flow will stop. Well, you could just obey the law and say, your cash flow won't stop. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll have to continue reading through this just because it gives us a framework for pointing out all the places where this is all falling apart. And unfortunately, people don't know much more to do than, I guess these things could be pointed at and saying, well, this is compliance in advance. If you're trying to figure out whether your program is affected, it's not, because this memo isn't legally binding. It's not a power that the president has. Unless, of course, you're all wrong about the way things have worked since forever, and you think that this is not how it works, but in fact, the robed figures of the Supreme Court may decide that it is how it works, and the way it has worked for the past 50 plus years is all a mistake. It was all an illusion. Sorry, we've been wrong this whole time. Or you've all been wrong, or we've all been wrong, and we've decided that this thing is going to be stood on its head. That actually comes up next in the piece here. We had just heard from Donald Kettle, the professor emeritus from University of Maryland, who says, well, there'll be widespread panic, and people will have to scramble to figure out if and when their cash flow will stop. In 2 pages, this memo, what amounts to 60 years of tradition and policies that are thrown up in the air, said Kettle, who was consulted for multiple government agencies. For those suffering most, the uncertainty will be immense. G. William Hoagland, senior vice president at the Bipartisan Policy Center, said the administration should be legally able to pause the money temporarily, but would need to submit a formal request to Congress to do so beyond a set window. And I think that's being awfully generous as well. It's just not the case that you can pause things temporarily or otherwise. Still, Hoagland and other budget experts have expressed concern about Trump's promises to wrest spending control away from Congress. Hoagland said he fears the deferral could be a precursor to a broader assertion of executive spending power. Well, only because they wrote that it was. I worry this is an effort to hold back on not implementing the law of the land as it relates to the budget process, Hoagland said. It is. And in terms of the impact, it could be huge, you think? The Trump administration has also acted rapidly to freeze most public communications by federal health agencies, as well as temporarily pausing foreign aid. You can read the whole memo below if you want. It's included in the link. I don't think it's going to clear anything up to read it to you. I think we got the broad outlines of what people saw in there and then what they imagined it might mean. And I guess to the extent that there's confusion, the issue is, are there certain circumstances in which a president could direct the OMB to pause funding? The Michigan law professor we read from first said there are, but they are specific and enumerated, and none of those conditions are met here. Oh, well, so it's possible. Yes, but not in this case, because none of these things that they're claiming hit the mark of the 3 exceptions that are allowed by law. But there are exceptions allowed by law. Yes. And I mean, it's not ridiculous to point that out at this point, because at first, it was dumb of them to say, well, the reason that we're pausing things is the president wants us to pause them. Now, that's not one of the 3 reasons. And in fact, it is the very reason for the existence of the Impoundment Control Act. So it's really kind of goes to the heart of things. But I guess you might as well suggest, well, could they at this point say, oh, no, wait a minute. I said it was because the president wanted that to happen. But what did you say the 3 things that were okay were? Yeah, it's one of those. I mean, that could happen. And no competent court should allow it. In review, they should say, well, the first time was correct. You said it was because the president wanted it. And then when you found out that was illegal, you backtracked and said, what are the legal things? Okay, it's one of them. We don't actually believe you. But on the other hand, 5 robed figures could say, yes, we laid out what the law, or Congress laid out what the law was, and you found your way into it. The first thing you said was a kind of a mistake, but then you took it back. You're allowed backsies, and you're immune. So go ahead and change your mind. Okay. I mean, that could yet happen. Let's see. Steve Vladeck has some things to say about it in his Substack here. Let's see how he put it. The impoundment crisis of 2025. The Trump administration's Monday spending freeze is likely to provoke a crisis over the constitutionality of impoundment, one that the justices could well have to resolve very soon. And he says it this way. He wanted to put out an extra post tonight in light of Monday afternoon's stunning news, first broken right up at the top by Marissa Kabas, that the Trump administration is apparently freezing nearly all federal grants and loans domestically and internationally, hitting the pause button on what may potentially amount to hundreds of billions of dollars of money appropriated by Congress for a dizzying array of specific preordained purposes. Remember, the memo claims trillions of dollars. And right here, embedded in the middle of it, is the Blue Sky post from Marissa pointing out the new OMB temporarily pauses all agency grants and loan programs. Per a copy of the memo, the use of federal resources to advance Marxist equity. I should have read you the memo after all. Marxist equity, transgenderism, and Green New Deal social engineering policies is a waste of taxpayer dollars that does not improve the day-to-day lives of those we serve. Neither does this memo, of course. And in fact, it significantly worsens the day-to-day lives of those we serve. But I guess never mind that. Maybe now that I'm reminded of how ridiculous the memo is, it should be. We'll say it this way. You should spend some time reading it. That's probably the way we should deal with it. The move, Vladeck continues, was announced in a cryptic and thinly reasoned 2-page memo that went out over the signature of Matthew J. Vaith, the acting director of the White House Office of Management and Budget. And the consequences are potentially cataclysmic for virtually all foreign aid, including the distribution of HIV drugs in poor countries, although perhaps more to the interests of MAGA types even, as Tom pointed out earlier. maybe the people guarding ISIS prisoners for us in Syria or elsewhere. Let's see, for medical and other scientific research in the United States, cancer research, mom's cancer research, like Greg told you yesterday, even before this memo came out, for tons of different pools of support for educational institutions and for virtually every other entity that receives federal financial assistance. The memo excludes funds paid directly to individuals, like Social Security or other benefits, although it offers no principled basis for the distinction, which is where we really run into trouble. The freeze purports, thank you, to be temporary and only to the extent permissible by law, whatever that means. Now, that's important. And we find that wording in a lot of Trump's executive orders, which I interpret to mean, I know this is probably illegal and or unconstitutional, and that this may be overruled and stopped at the district court level when somebody sues, but I want to wave it around and say I did a thing. So he'll give an executive order. I hereby order that all pepperoni will be diverted to Mar-a-Lago for my personal consumption. You can say it and then say, by the way, this order is only issued to the extent permissible and only temporarily. But yeah, to the extent permissible, it's not permissible at all. So, I mean, this order is effective to the extent permissible. That's zero. But the point is, I signed it and I held it up and I had pictures and there's some panicked news stories and I've created confusion. And underlying it all is, to the extent permissible, right now, the extent permissible is zero. When the five robed figures get together and say the extent permissible is everything, 100%, then you were right and we were all pretty wrong, and there's nothing you can do about it because there's no appeal from those guys. There's no appeal to those guys either, by the way. I haven't seen it. But at any rate, you mean, I see. Legal appeal. Yeah, right. Well, okay. And that's where we are. The freeze purports to be temporary and only to the extent permissible, whatever that means. Thus, the Vaith memo directs all agencies that administer affected funds to submit detailed lists of projects suspended under the new order by February 10th. So from now on, even if your funding isn't paused, you're going to spend all your time between now and February 10th acting as though it were and writing out policy memos of how to deal with it, only to find out that the thing is getting overturned and the whole thing was a waste of time. And the Trump administration and the Steve Bannon types who want to smash the administrative state just have a good laugh that, okay, fine, we're not actually able to cut off the funding, but we paralyzed every federal agency from January 28th through February 10th with a stroke of the pen, just a squiggly line on a piece of paper, and the entire federal government came to a crashing halt, trying to figure out how it wouldn't be coming to a crashing halt, which is an amazing weapon. Those agencies, in turn, must assign responsibility and oversight to tracking the federal spending to a senior political appointee, not a career official. So that way, it's a bootlicker for Trump. That's interesting. Ordinarily, you try not to assign things that way. But there is no guarantee that the spigot, not the California spigot, the federal funding spigot, will be turned back on in 2 weeks. Because temporary means what? I can't believe they said 2 weeks. And in the interim, the withholding of so much money will almost certainly cause irreparable harm to at least some of the affected parties, even if it is fully restored at the end of the pause, quote unquote pause. Thus, even if this measure is a stopgap, and that's debatable at best, it's one that's likely to cause numerous crises all on its own. Of course, the fact that it will be likely to cause irreparable harm means that it's likely to be stopped by an injunction. But I guess it's a race to see whether you get to Matthew Kaczmarek's courtroom to ask for that injunction, or Eileen Cannon's, or somewhere else. Even as the Trump administration has embarked upon a flurry of controversial initiatives over the past week, I've been reluctant to swing at every pitch, but this action belongs in a category unto itself. In essence, the Trump administration is claiming the unilateral power to at least temporarily, quote, impound tens of billions, even more, of appropriated funds in direct conflict with Congress's constitutional power of the purse, and in more flagrant violation of the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. when, not if, recipients of the funds, frozen funds, sue to challenge the agency's compliance with the Vaith memo, it's a virtual certainty that the Trump administration will argue that the ICA is unconstitutional and that the president has inherent constitutional authority to impound. The argument is a loser, but it's a good bet that it's going to be up to the Supreme Court to say so, and probably a heck of a lot sooner than we might have predicted as recently as yesterday. So creating the crisis in order to get emergency review, and the less time they have to think about it, I guess the fear is the greater the worry that 5 of them will say, to hell with it. Sure, do what you want to do. A brief overview of impoundment is offered next. Let's see. I don't know how brief it is, but it's the topic of the day. The question of whether the president can refuse to expend or impound funds Congress has appropriated for a designated purpose is one that has come up every so often in American history, albeit not on this scale. Sometimes Congress passes statutes that give at least some spending discretion to the president, but absent such authorization, the prevailing consensus has long been that Congress's power of the purse, the spending clause, in the very first enumerated regulatory power that the Constitution confers upon the legislature, brings with it broad power to specify the purposes for which appropriated funds are to be spent, and that a broad presidential impoundment power would be inconsistent with that constitutional authority. If the president can accomplish Congress's intended goal by spending less money, that's one thing. But simply refusing to spend the appropriated funds because the president is opposed to why Congress appropriated the money, that's something else altogether. Even the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, which tends to err on the side of the president in these kinds of separation of powers disputes, concluded in 1988 that the overwhelming weight of authority is against such a broad power in the face of an express congressional directive to spend. As OLC explained, there is no textual source in the Constitution for any inherent authority to impound. It has been argued that the president has such an authority because the specific decision of whether or not to spend appropriated funds constitutes the execution of the laws. In Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution vests the executive power in the president alone. That's the theory, right? The execution of any law, however, is by definition an executive function, and it seems an anomalous proposition that because the president is charged with the execution of the laws, he may also disregard the direction of Congress and decline to execute them. In other words, I need to make sure that the laws are faithfully executed by not executing them. That's not really helpful. Similarly, reliance upon the president's obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, Article 2, Section 3, to give the president the authority to impound funds in order to protect the national fisc, creates the anomalous result that the president would be declining to execute laws under the claim of faithfully executing them. Moreover, if accepted, arguments in favor of an inherent impoundment power carried to their logical conclusion would render congressional directions to spend merely advisory. Thus, even without the Impoundment Control Act, the kind of across-the-board impoundment that the OMB memo is effectuating, even temporarily, should be pretty plainly unconstitutional. But the Impoundment Control Act appears to resolve the illegality of this the Impoundment Control Act, the existence of it, appears to resolve the illegality of this move beyond dispute. And yet here we are disputing it. We have confusion. Enacted in response to an unprecedented volume of impoundment efforts by President Nixon, the act creates a procedural framework within which the president can attempt to impound certain kinds of appropriated funds. Specifically, the ICA creates a fast-track procedure for Congress to consider a president's request, a special message, that is how it's termed, to rescind funds that he identifies for reasons he specifies. Under the statute, the president may defer spending on those funds for up to 45 days following such a request, which it should be noted he has not made yet. But if Congress does not approve the president's rescission request within 45 days of receiving it, I guess that's where enhanced rescissions came to, then the funds must be spent. What's more, the ICA specifically exempts certain kinds of appropriated funds from even the ICA's impoundment procedure, those that are required or mandated to be spent by the relevant statute. At least some of those funds are necessarily encompassed within the pool of funds frozen by the Vaith memo. Oh no. Ironically, as the GAO has long explained, adherence to the ICA is thus the only legal way for a president to impound appropriated funds. President Trump clearly hasn't followed that procedure here. Again, for much of the funds at issue, he couldn't. But that pathway hasn't stopped those who have been clamoring for President Trump to take this kind of action from arguing that the ICA is unconstitutional anyway, by purporting to limit the circumstances in which the president can otherwise exercise a unilateral constitutional impoundment power that no one believes exists. Again, there may be contexts in which the president can impound modest chunks of appropriated funds, but only because and pursuant to how Congress has authorized it under the ICA. And there's no argument. There's just no argument that that's what has happened or that is what even could happen here. What about this Supreme Court? Well, it stands to reason that unless this directive is quickly rescinded, and perhaps not even then, there will quickly be lawsuits by those who were entitled to the frozen funds, challenging agencies' compliance with the Vaith memo on both constitutional and statutory grounds. Even relatively narrower views of Article 3 standing would look favorably upon plaintiffs who had been relying on frozen federal funds. We'll see whether they tell you don't have any standing here. Sorry. Such lawsuits would almost certainly move quickly, perhaps generating some kind of injunctive relief in which lower courts order the relevant agency officials, that is, the officials responsible for disbursement of the public funds withheld from the plaintiffs, to cease withholding appropriated funds. Those rulings, in turn, would likely provoke Trump's Justice Department into seeking emergency relief from intermediate appeals courts and eventually from the Supreme Court itself. It's too soon to say at this juncture exactly which case will get to the justices first, but the longer the Vaith memo stays on the books, the more likely it is that some dispute arising out of it will reach the court very quickly. Indeed, I wrote shortly after the election that this Supreme Court term could very well end up being dominated by emergency litigation involving Trump administration policies. I had thought, until yesterday, that the birthright citizenship executive order would get there first. But given that lawless nonsense isn't supposed to go into effect until next month and has already been blocked by a lower court in the interim, impoundment may well beat it to one First Street. More than just getting there first, the impoundment issue also presents an even more fundamental question about the structure of our government when it goes beyond even the enormous moral and practical implications of the birthright citizenship issue. If presidents can impound appropriated funds at any time for any reason, there's not much point to having a legislature. That's also why I'm not as skeptical of this court being hostile to a broad claim of a presidential impoundment power, as I suspect many readers are, even after the broad embrace of Article 2 power in last summer's presidential immunity ruling. This is somewhat good news. Maybe, but we'll see. For as much as this court has embraced the unitary executive theory of executive power, does anybody remember me and others yelling about that during the George W. Bush administration? We were kind of early on that. Impoundment has never been a central feature of that school of thought, as reflected in, among lots of other places, the OLC opinion referenced above. That was from 1988, George H.W. Bush administration. Well, I guess that would have been under Reagan. But the 88 election, of course, then installed H.W. afterwards. So, yeah, a Reagan-era OLC memo. Reagan, what a rhino, huh? But anyway, it's one thing to believe that the president must have unitary control of the executive branch. It's quite another thing, and you shouldn't believe that, but it's quite another to believe that such control extends to the right to refuse to spend any and all money Congress appropriates. One can see at least some view of the significance and breadth of Congress's appropriations power in last term's ruling in the CFPB case, which Justice Thomas wrote and from which only Justices Alito and Gorsuch dissented. And even for judges and justices who might be somewhat more sympathetic to nuanced impoundment claims, the Vaith memo ain't it. Instead of a carefully calibrated argument against the compulsory nature of specific appropriations, the Vaith memo is a clumsy Marxist? Come on. Clumsy broadsword. Perhaps it's so transparently harmful, preposterous, and unlawful that we'll see the administration walk it back in the coming days. If not, it stands to reason that the Supreme Court will have to settle the matter within the next few weeks, and that even this court is likely to oblige. Okay, I don't know whether he means oblige by taking up the thing and then killing it, or I don't think he means obliging Trump in all of this. So, I mean, I think he's right, and that in all likelihood we'll see a very quick movement to the Supreme Court, and that it won't stop before. I guess they could, depending on how it comes out at the appellate level, decline to take up the case if the appellate courts just say, no, you can't do this. No, the end. And they might say, if they intend to rule that way, no, forget it. But I don't know. They may want to stay in the spotlight. And, of course, there's always some chance, I guess, that there's some compromise somewhere. But, yeah, I mean, luckily, Roberts, to some extent, and even Amy Coney Barrett, to some extent, are embarrassed by this garbage that undermines the value of their own legal educations. So we'll see whether they rely on that to save the day 2 weeks too late, and of course having done irreparable damage to everyone. Okay, so a couple of other things. I mentioned the water thing in passing at the beginning. So there's this thing going on, you see. Trump apparently put out on Truth Social yesterday this weirdo claim. I don't even know if I can come up with it quickly enough in my feed, but somebody put side by side, his tweet and then what he said or what actually happened. And I'm not certain if my pocket files contain a copy of what he had to say, but I hope so. Yeah, here it is. Dave Anthony. Thank you, Dave Anthony, for putting these two things together. So Trump on Truth Social writes for everybody, the United States military just entered the great state of California and under emergency powers turned on the water flowing abundantly from the Pacific Northwest and beyond. The days of putting a fake environmental argument over the people are over. Enjoy the water, California. What the effing F is he talking about? Well, among other things, the California Water Authorities here, it said the military did not enter California. The federal government restarted federal water pumps after they were offline for maintenance for 3 days. Plus it rained. State water supplies in Southern California remain plentiful. I mean, it's a very dry refutation, fact-based refutation from a bureaucracy, which, doesn't do a great deal, but at least gives us some idea of what actually happened and from what basis in reality Trump took off on a flight of fantasy. Where the military enters California, I don't know. But because it was very strongly strong when it was done, it must have been the military that did it. It wasn't me. I was golfing. But there you go. I think I put something aside on this from The Hill. Trump has also ordered agencies to override California policies that, quote, unduly burden water deliveries. There aren't any, but once again, he's got the impression, well, the fire hydrants, it didn't work, and that's because federal government says it needs to happen, but the state says you got to have the smelts in the place and the fish. And so he's got a very vague idea about what's going on. And it's, also not correct and also not nearly nuanced enough for what's actually going on. But this is he's issued another one of those orders. To the extent practicable and whatever's legal, I want you to do the things that I say. And none of it is legal, and none of the things that he says are happening. So I guess, there you have it. We're not gonna be doing anything. All right. I'll tell you what. I got some other things to catch up on. That's certainly true. Let's read a little bit of this crazy OMB memo because I just remembered along the way how weird and stupid sounding it is. And maybe we'll get to some of the really crazy stuff before the end of the break, or the beginning of the break. So what do we got here? Oh, probably not. All right. The American people, it begins, elected Donald J. Trump to be president of the United States. Yeah, thank you very much. And gave him the mandate, to increase the impact of every federal taxpayer dollar. That is a very weak premise, but okay. In fiscal year 2024, of the nearly $10 trillion that the federal government spent, that doesn't appear to be true. More than $3 trillion was federal financial assistance, which doesn't really make any great sense, such as grants and loans. Career and political appointees in the executive branch have a duty to align federal spending and action with the will of the American people as expressed through presidential priorities. No, they don't. Financial assistance should be dedicated to advancing administration priorities. No, it shouldn't. Focusing taxpayer dollars to advance a stronger and safer America. Eliminating the financial burden of inflation for citizens. Unleashing American energy and manufacturing. Ending wokeness, oh boy, and weaponizing of the government. Promoting efficiency in government. And it still hasn't mentioned Marxism.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen versus Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So we talked into the break, and you probably missed some bit of it, but I was just noting that we haven't even gotten to the invocation of Marxism yet. But again, just to build up to the wackiness here, the claim here is that financial assistance from the federal government should be dedicated to advancing administration priorities. Maybe. Focusing taxpayer dollars to advance a stronger and safer America. We're all for that. Eliminating the financial burden of inflation for citizens. You're never going to eliminate inflation. But to the extent that you're helping eliminate any financial burden of inflation for citizens, why not help them pay for their food? Because this thing doesn't do that. It does the opposite. Unleashing American energy and manufacturing, ending wokeness, now we're really going off the rails, and the weaponization of government, promoting efficiency in government, that's nice, you probably should have listed that before wokeness, and making America healthy again. How do you like that? The use of federal resources to advance Marxist equity, transgenderism, and the Green New Deal social engineering policies is a waste of taxpayer dollars that does not improve the day-to-day lives of those we serve. This memorandum requires federal agencies to identify and review all federal financial assistance programs and supporting activities consistent with the president's policies and requirements. There's some footnotes here. For example, during the initial days of his administration, President Donald J. Trump issued a series of executive orders to protect the American people and safeguard valuable taxpayer resources, including protecting the American people against invasion. This is the title of one of his executive orders. Reevaluating and realigning the United States foreign aid. Putting America first in international environment agreements. Unleashing American energy. Ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing. Those are all titles of executive orders. Oh, there's more. Defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. And enforcing the Hyde Amendment. Boo. These executive orders ensure that federal funds are used to support hardworking American families, except for the ones that they were helping support. Those monies go after yourself. To implement these orders, each agency must complete a comprehensive analysis of all their federal financial assistance programs to identify programs, projects, and activities that may be implicated by any of the president's executive orders. In the interim, and to the extent permissible under applicable law, 0, federal agencies, now bold, must temporarily pause all activities related to obligation or disbursement of all federal financial assistance and other relevant agency activities that may be implicated by these executive orders, including but not limited to financial assistance for foreign aid, non-governmental organizations, DEI, woke gender ideology, and the Green New Deal. This temporary pause will provide the administration time to review. Oh, by the way, also the broccoli mandate has to be ruled out as well. Plus the Cornhusker kickback. Anything else that doesn't exist? More funding for giant water taps. The temporary pause will provide the administration time to review agency programs and determine the best use of funding for those programs consistent with the law and the president's priorities. Look, these appropriations bills have been on the books for a long time. You should have been doing your homework ahead of time. No temporary pauses so that you can make up lost homework. The temporary pause will become effective January 28th, 2025 at 5 p.m. Don't listen to them. Even before completing their comprehensive analysis, federal agencies must immediately identify all or any legally mandated actions or deadlines for assistance programs arising while the pause remains in effect. Federal agencies must report this information to OMB along with an analysis of the requirement. OMB also directs federal agencies to pause all activities associated with open NOFOs. I'm not even certain, but you can probably look up what that's about, and I think that is probably about funding obligations and future contracting that was mentioned earlier, such as conducting merit review panels. No later than February 10th, agencies shall submit to OMB detailed information on any programs, projects, or activities subject to the pause. Well, you tell me what this covers, apparently, is what this says. That's interesting. And I don't know, it gets drier from there on in. We got up to the inclusion and invocation of Marxism. That was the important part in all of this, in the sense that it didn't make any sense. But, yeah, I mean, I guess here I just got to tell you, I've never heard of Matthew Vaith. He's an acting director, and I don't care what his authority is, and I don't know whether he really has that authority. These guys have forged every other kind of document under the sun, and I don't know if he's really working at OMB. I would have thought that somebody working at OMB would have known that the federal budget wasn't $10 trillion last year. But never mind. I'm sure it can't do any harm to stop all work and report to this hoaxster over the next couple of weeks. Okay. Just wanted to point that out. And I wanted to point that out on Blue Sky during the break, and I didn't get to finish, but I think I probably should. Anyway. Oh, I can't type and talk at the same time, but I want to get this out there. All right, I'll pause. We'll deal with this later on and maybe at the end of the show. Okay, other things I wanted to revisit here. There were so many. One, yesterday's show was great. How about that? How? In what sense? Probably one or two of the funny jokes, the golden voice tea, which I think is working, actually. Anyway, thanks, Scott. We appreciate that. Although I really have to change my morning routine. The coffee is the get going kind of stuff. Although I bet I could really do without that. Caffeine doesn't really affect me that much, but that's the taste I want, not the asparagus root. I got to be honest with you. But the coffee, I think, does the opposite of what I got to drink the coffee black, I suppose, if we want to have any hope of having a clear voice. But the tea seems to work nicely, but how do you drink the two of them at the same time? That's the problem. Anyway, yesterday's show, awesome. How so? We spoke with Greg over about the sanctions purportedly put in place or were being threatened against Colombia because of the whole repatriation flights, the deportation. Repatriation. It's deportation flights using military aircraft, and that the media couldn't seem to make up its mind about what has actually happened here and who was giving in to whom. The White House was saying that the Colombians, they acceded to all our demands. Colombia saying, no, actually we didn't, and you did accede to our demands. We said no use of military aircraft. And you said, no, they agreed to our allowing us to use the military aircraft. But at the same time, Colombia was saying, we're sending our own aircraft to pick people up to make sure that they're treated with dignity. And it was just totally unclear. But instead, most of the news media was, well, Trump says he won, so I guess he won. And I guess I just wanted to point out here, and Scott sent me this as well. I had already picked this up, but I appreciated Scott having the sharp eye to see that this was going to be important to our audience as well. It's almost as if I wrote the headline for Bloomberg News myself. I did not. I don't even subscribe to Bloomberg News. But I guess I could and should. And maybe one of these days, drop the subscriptions to the papers we hate so much. Not that Bloomberg is any great shakes, but I don't know. They're not being yelled at as often as I can tell. Anyway, their headline, Trump's victory over Colombia now looks less clear-cut. Yes. Now you're talking. It does look less clear-cut, doesn't it? We can't read the whole thing, but I have this much I can share with you. A couple of paragraphs of the story. Trump's victory over Colombia, less clear as details emerge, is the current headline. It's changed over the last couple of hours. But the bullet points up at the top, Colombia sends own planes to bring people home after showdown. And those of you who listened yesterday know what that means. Trump runs the risk of overuse of tariff and sanctions threats. Another good point, which I think eventually made on yesterday's show, because we then pointed out the controversy was supposedly triggered over the use of military planes and the refusal to allow those military planes to land, and so therefore diverting those flights back to the United States. And Colombia was too bold in doing so, and so we're going to have a trade war with you, and maybe a real war, says Eric Trump as well. But then he deleted that. But we noticed that this had happened last week in Mexico, that we had sent military flights to Mexico last Thursday. They were refused landing rights. They turned around and went back, and there was no story. I mean, there was a story. We read the story, but there was no outrage, right? In the way we have here, like, oh my God, Colombia, how dare you refuse us our access to our military planes? We said we were going to be deporting these people. That's it. We're going to have a trade. We're going to tariff you very heavily now. And one possible reason for why there wasn't widespread notice of Mexico's refusal, but then there was widespread notice of Colombia's refusal, was, of course, Trump then threatened Colombia. So now there's a threat, so we got to pay attention to it. But why no threat leveraged against Mexico? Number of reasons, but probably not least of which is if Trump said, how dare you refuse a military flight deporting people to Mexico? We are going to tariff you very heavily. People would say, I thought you were already tariffing Mexico very heavily. If he had come back and said, that's it, 25% tariff on everything coming from Mexico. But you already said that, sir. I see. And one of the problems is it's all that's left in Trump's imagination beyond that. Well, in that case, I guess we're going to have a regular war. We're going to invade you with bombs and all the stuff that you do. We're going to ram the ramparts. We're going to take over the airports. And at least there are airports this time to take over. It's a possibility. And he's threatened war with Mexico before. But that, too, would be like, well, but you've also threatened that. You've threatened invasion. You've threatened fighting the cartels in Mexico with the U.S. military. Just don't look when we cross your border. So I don't know. It just wouldn't make any sense. It didn't ring any bells in the newsrooms as news. But with Colombia, it was news. But anyway, it turns out that too wasn't really news the way they were saying it. They were just talking out their asses. So anyway, that I think was an important point about the Mexico thing. He had already played the tariff hand, and all that's left is war beyond that. And I don't know if does anybody believe we were going to go to war with Mexico? Maybe. Anybody believe we're going to go to war with Colombia? Maybe. But on the other hand, we're also supposed to be going to war with Canada, Panama, and Greenland and Denmark. So We're a little busy on the war front, and so nobody noticed the Mexico thing. Anyway, there you have it. That's what came to mind when I read this bullet point. Trump runs the risk of overuse of tariff and sanctions threats. Eric Martin wrote this piece for Bloomberg News. We only have access to a couple of paragraphs. Let's read them just to pat ourselves on the back for doing a good job parsing the news yesterday and say all the big name mainstream media outlets were saying Trump victory, they backed down. There's some confusion, but mostly it's them backing down. And we said, it's really not. And now Bloomberg says the same thing, I guess. A deportation arrangement with Colombia that the White House presented as a total victory for Donald Trump looks less clear 2 days later. The migrants the U.S. tried to deport by U.S. military flights on Sunday started traveling home on Monday on Colombian Air Force planes, President Gustavo Petro said in posts on social media. That's different than what the White House announced on Sunday night when Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, who I guess is now notorious liar Caroline Leavitt, said Colombia accepted, quote, all of President Trump's terms, including, quote, on U.S. military aircraft without limitation or delay, unquote. She made no mention of Colombia sending its own planes. Of course, Colombia sent Air Force planes, and so they're like, well, we said military, we just didn't say which military. I don't think so. She made no mention of Colombia sending its own planes. The agreement came in exchange for Trump sparing the nation from 25% tariffs and financial sanctions. The Trump administration still plans to use military flights to deport people to Colombia over the next few weeks on an as-needed basis. We just decided it wasn't needed. Along with civilian flights, according to a U.S. official who asked not to be identified without permission to speak publicly, the use of Colombian planes saves American taxpayers the costs of those military flights, well, not the ones we already flew, and frees up U.S. aircraft to help with deportations to other countries, the official said. Although I don't know anybody else. I mean, Guatemala accepted U.S. military flights, but they may now get the idea, no, we shouldn't. Anyway, that it gives Petro more control over the way that Colombian citizens return home, both in terms of the conditions and the optics. That issue appeared to touch a nerve for him in the early hours of Sunday when he deauthorized the previously agreed military deportation flights after images emerged of deportees to neighboring Brazil arriving handcuffed and shackled. Petro, in the posts on X on Monday and Tuesday, celebrated the arrival of the deportees and said that Colombia would be offering them cheap loans to help them find their feet. Our compatriots come from the United States free, dignified, without being handcuffed, the Colombian president said in the posts. They are in their homeland where they are loved. The migrant is not a criminal. He is a human being who wants to work and progress, to live life. There's a post here embedded from Gustavo Petro in Espanol explaining all of that with some photos of some returnees wearing masks, by the way. Good for your health. So there you go. Oh, it looks like we have access to more of this article than we thought. Maybe they only paywall it for a certain amount of time. I don't know. That's weird. Anyway, Trump's playbook comes up next. At the end of the day, the arrangement still accomplishes the Trump administration's primary goal, deporting undocumented migrants from the U.S. But the whole episode reflects a playbook used frequently during the first Trump presidency: stake out a maximalist negotiating position that creates a crisis with market impact and the potential for economic effect, resolve the crisis, and claim total victory. It's also very familiar in claiming total victory not only falsely, but prematurely, which is kind of the way he ran most of his campaigns as well. Doesn't sound like him, does it? Well, there's also a question of cost. The heavy-handed tariff and financial sanctions threats, which would have been devastating for Colombia if imposed, also run a strategic risk, spurring other countries to look at the U.S. threat of economic punishment and deciding to diversify toward non-U.S. trade partners and payment systems, said John Lipsky, Senior Director of the Geoeconomic Center at the Atlantic Council. It's a good point. Got something else in pocket on that. That's how this show works. While the U.S. is historically Colombia's top trade partner, Colombia has already been strengthening its ties with China. During the period on Sunday when U.S. tariffs looked imminent, Petro called for deepening his nation's connections with other markets. Having seen Colombia's experience, other countries may follow suit. You have to wonder if there's a Pyrrhic victory here, because the more countries see this threat, the more they start turning and looking at ways they can diversify their own trading relationships, Lipsky said. There is a long term, to the overuse of the threat. I think they broadly got the result they wanted here, but I do think there'll be more cost throughout the region in the months to come. That's true. Next move for China is to say, well, if you can't sell your coffee and crude oil and cut flowers to the United States, how about you sell them to China? In fact, how about we build you a port with a 99-year lease on it? You pay nothing. You get a brand new port facility and maybe a brand new airport facility. China owns and operates it for 99 years. And you start flying your stuff to our place, and we pay you in Chinese currency, not dollars. Or if you want, we'll even pay you with our dollar reserve if you want the dollars. And it sounds like a pretty good deal all of a sudden. Not traditionally easy to implement, getting things to China from Colombia before the jet age wasn't happening a great deal. But now that and even shipping capacity wasn't there. Now it's there. They can absolutely move in anywhere that we spurn. So, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Your coffee prices went up anyway. They don't care whether there's a tariff imposed on Colombia or not. They got the opportunity to jack up prices, and they're going to do it. Plus, you're addicted to the coffee as it is. And also, as an added bonus, the death of the Monroe Doctrine. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, just another little history lesson here. Let's continue on. Military flights, I guess, comes up next. That isn't to say that the episode was a victory for Petro. This whole nonsense. The showdown with Colombia happened in part because Petro, Trump found his match for a leader willing to use social media in unpredictable ways to set policy. Oh, that's interesting. Would you like a job in the Democratic Party up here? No, you're probably busy. Petro posted his denial of the military flights around 3:30 a.m. on Sunday morning. That took both his ambassador and the Trump administration by surprise because the Colombian government had earlier authorized the military flights. Petro himself, in an X post that he later erased, said on Saturday night that Colombia was ready to welcome the deportation flights with flags and flowers. He was clearly, defiant to the purpose of these things and insistent on denying Trump his victory in deportation. But then he realized, oh yeah, what am I doing authorizing military flights for this garbage? The dispute quickly ratcheted up with Trump announcing tariffs via Truth Social in the early afternoon on Sunday and Petro responding with a reciprocal threat by X several hours later. Colombian economic groups expressed big concerns about the potential consequences of a trade war. The U.S. accounts for almost a third of Colombia's sales abroad, or $13 billion last year through November. Former ministers and business leaders demanded the use of diplomatic channels to solve the crisis, with some analysts considering Petro's reaction to the U.S. deportation plans as hot-headed and failing to measure the economic consequences. But actually, it was exactly what the doctor ordered, isn't it? That's funny. After the White House announced, we should take a lesson from that. After the White House announced the agreement to hold off on tariffs on Sunday night, one of the first confirmations from the Colombian government that the nation was in fact in agreement was Petro reposting Levitt's statement on X. This was a humiliating experience for Petro, said Nicholas Watson, London-based managing director of Teneo, a consulting and advisory firm. But the perception of U.S. bullying grows. And if that perception grows, I guess is what it really says here, then Petro could end up being seen as the leader who was the first to stand up to Trump. And I think that's the outcome that you're getting here. It sounds to me like Nicholas Watson's first part of his statement is relevant to the coverage of the past 2 days, and his hedging is more relevant to the coverage as it now develops in Business Insider, Bloomberg, and our own discussion of it yesterday. I think that is probably closer to the reality of the situation. All right. Interesting. And thanks, Scott, for sending that along and making sure that that was bumped to the top of the collection from Pocket. I said there was something else in Pocket related to this, and I'm going to scroll and see if I can remember it along the way here. What were we talking about? Colombia and Dang, I can't remember offhand what we were talking about. That was... I'm going to have to jump back into the article, I think, and see if I can find it. I should have marked where I was in the reading, but let's see. I'm going to have to scroll back down and see if I can find it. Where were we when we were doing this? It was right about in the middle of the article, and it occurred to me that we had something connected. It was, let's see, no, that was the handcuffs, the wearing of the masks. Oh, right. Maybe was it about here? Oh, yes. The whole episode reflects a playbook used frequently during the first Trump presidency. Stake out the maximalist position. Now, yeah, it's still not coming to mind here. Spurring other countries to look at the threat of punishment design. Non-U.S. trading partners. Okay. Yes. Now I remember. Great. Shoo. We found it. So now when I go back to Pocket, I can look for and scan the right thing. It had to do, in fact, with the threats against Canada and Greenland and others, of course. But it's probably down here. But I think it had to do with Canadian steel production. Right? And you think, oh, that's a little bit out of left field. If I can find the thing in time, I can read it to you. There we go. Oh, also from Bloomberg News. Wow, they're really doing a bang-up job there. I didn't realize that it was from Bloomberg, and I don't know if it'll matter that it's from Bloomberg. But here's the story. Canada and Mexico steelmakers refuse new U.S. orders. I don't know if I'm going to be able to actually read this article. This one may be blocked by the paywall. I don't know what their paywall situation is over there, but that's okay. You need to just get the gist. Bullet points, a quote here. There's a lot of trepidation, unquote, in the industry. Flack CEO says. I don't know who that is or what Flack is, but second bullet, Trump this week, that means last week, I think, January 24th is the date on this thing. Trump this week warned of 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada. See, I knew we had heard that before. And it won't let me look at the article now. I was hoping for a couple of paragraphs here. Maybe I can get it out of Pocket. Here we go. Some steelmakers in Canada and Mexico are telling customers that they are refusing new orders to the U.S. on concerns that President Donald Trump soon will reimpose duties. Canada's Stelco, is that right? Just one E, Stelco, has been telling U.S.-based customers it is pausing sales quotes. According to a person familiar with the matter, Mexico-based steel suppliers also stopped taking orders for material this week as they await potential action from Trump, according to Flack Global Metals, a large buyer. That's the Flack CEO we were hearing about earlier. So do we have the tariffs in place? Do we not have the tariffs in place? Are there repercussions for threatening to put tariffs in place, even if you eventually don't put them in place? Yes, steel orders get at least delayed as manufacturers in the countries that are facing tariff threats say, well, I can't quote you a price on that stuff. And in fact, I'm not selling to the United States right now because I don't know how to price my materials for you, because there might be tariffs, there might not be tariffs. It might be on steel. It might not be on steel. It might be 25%. It might not be 25%. I can't price things for you. So I might as well just tell you I can't sell to you. So, we're in a situation here where all of a sudden it looks really attractive to the rest of the Western Hemisphere to start making China their top trading partner. Perhaps let China, with its, what do they call their Belt and Roads Initiative or whatever, and that they're going to, are you going to start building extra and enhanced trade infrastructure in these countries in exchange for control of it? Maybe not in exchange for control of it, just in exchange for getting a bigger bite of the trade out of these countries. And Mexico and Canada, and they need to sell steel to stay afloat. The United States, surely the biggest consumer of that steel, now to be replaced by, gee whiz, does anybody else have any infrastructure projects going on anywhere around the world that they might need steel beams for? I know, China. If only they had the shipping capacity to... They do. And of course, Mexican and even Canadian steel can now be picked up and is a lot closer to its destination in, let's say, Colombia, where they're building maybe a new modern airport and seaport, and just ship it straight down. I don't know. It looks like it might work out. Who lost the trade? Who lost the Monroe Doctrine? We'll be asking in the future, and the answer seems to be Donald Trump or whoever he left in charge while he was out golfing. Wow. Okay. Well, guess what? We've hit the end of the show for today and the end of the number of shows that we have allotted for the week. Golly, there's still a lot that we should have been talking about but won't have the chance to do. But hey, that's where we currently stand. Time now, though, to play our outro music and get ready to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And I imagine there might be a few items that we haven't gotten to that he has planned for your listening pleasure coming up after this. Also need to catch up, I guess, over the weekend. We'll have to do a reading on our own, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, on Monday with Greg to some extent. The withdrawal of the United States, allegedly, from the World Health Organization. I got something probably pretty lengthy. Can't squeeze it in. From Just Security, under the title of The Legal Problem with Trump's WHO Order. The U.S. cannot withdraw until it pays its dues. Of course, we can just, walk around not paying our dues. But apparently we'd be, I can't believe it, under Donald Trump, stiffing the World Health Organization on our way out the door. I don't know if that's going to make any real change in the way the policy gets affected, but who knows? Anyway, we're deadbeats, it turns out, and great to have Trump sullying our name across the hemisphere and now the world. All right, time, as I said, to hand things over to Justice Putnam, and here's what he's got on tap for you today. Trump could not finish his first week as president, quote, without violating the law, and we're right about that one. Oh, a former New York State trooper who lied that a mysterious black man shot him has been arrested and charged with official misconduct, tampering with evidence, and falsifying documents. Very popular these days, falsifying documents.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Oh, and of course, right at the last second, I realized, there was something I definitely wanted to lead off the show with today, and I didn't get to it. Another of the January 6th pardonees found himself, let's say, in trouble with the law. Shot and killed during a traffic stop. Amazingly, you can't get shot and killed storming the Capitol. The traffic stop? Look out. We'll see you next week.